Calm, focus, happy.
Hey, Mindful Tribe. I'm here today with an ex-paramedic, and he's a holistic nutritionist specializing in gut health. So this is a topic that we've talked about before, but I think we're going to get into it in a lot more detail today. This whole thing about gut health, it can help us in so many ways if we can get our gut to be healthy. And some of us don't even realize how devastating it can be if our gut is not healthy. So we're going to be talking about all of this. And my guest today that I have on the line with me is Josh Dech. Josh, are you in mindfulness mode today?
I am so mindfulness mode today, Bruce. I got up at 6 o'clock, took an hour, just started prepping and just did some breath work, some extra breaths to get some more oxygen into my brain because it's 7 a.m. here. So
yeah. And it's early here too. And it's so great to have you on the show because this is a real major topic that we should be open to and really be like just all ears, basically. So before we get into the topic of gut health, tell us what mindfulness means to you, Josh.
Well, it's an interesting question because it's not something that people who aren't mindful will ask you almost ever. And there's a lot of definitions. For me, it's being an observer. It's so easy to take a look at things, make snap decisions, snap judgments, rather than to sit back. And the greatest piece of advice I'd ever been given in my entire life is seek first to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I do that in everything I do, both in my relationships with my wife, my friends, my work colleagues, the professionals I work with. When something looks nuts, especially today, when the internet blows things out of proportion and there's lefts and rights in politics, and let's just understand first where they're coming from, where they're at, why they're acting or being or doing. And it just changes everything. It's a whole different perspective on life.
So you became a paramedic. Tell us about your life as a paramedic and how it transitioned then later into this specialty of gut health.
Well, truthfully, it was a very short career, Bruce. It wasn't something that was extraordinarily long. I was graduated in 2013, and by 2015, I was in a new career.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, there's a lot of happenstance there. And I was lucky enough to do a lot of really amazing things without really dealing with a lot of the PTSD a lot of my work colleagues did, with some really horrible, devastating calls they have gone to. But it was a really interesting career. You got to get very innovative working in, rural Newfoundland for sure.
Oh, is that where you were working?
That's right. Little town called Ferryland.
Okay.
And just town of 500, hour away from a hospital. And a lot of things can go wrong, especially when there's fishing and carbon monoxide in the winters and accidents and ATV trails and moose and bears and all kinds. So had some really interesting stuff that had happened. But long and short, I ended up coming across Canada. I went back to Ontario, where I'm from, and I tried to get a job as a paramedic, and just nothing was working. I drove right up from Windsor, which Windsor, all the way to Sudbury. I hit every town along the way, and I just couldn't find a job. And I thought, well, damn, better move. And so I came out to Calgary, Alberta.
Right.
And again, paramedics, my license wouldn't transfer over. It was a whole thing. And I thought, well, while I'm waiting for this, I'm going to lean back into my career, or one of my passions I've been doing for 10 years anyway. I'm going to lean into personal training. And I went all in on that.
Okay.
And this is when the door just opened. I quickly realized that what I was doing with people in personal training was different than paramedics. See, paramedics, you pick the same person up over and over and over for the same type of issue, a heart pain, chest pain, something going on, respiratory issues, illnesses. And I realized they went to the hospital, they got medication, they got sent back home, and that was it. And then you pick them up, they go to the hospital, get new medication, get sent back home. I'm asking symptom over symptom. It was sick care, not health care. And my eyes got opened. As a personal trainer, I brought in this client, Lynn, and she was fantastic, 57 years old. When she came to see me, she was on 17 pills and insulin for breakfast, 9 pills and insulin at bedtime, slept with a CPAP machine, was on disability at work. Her blood pressure was super high. She was borderline from what I could assess from my paramedic, congestive heart failure, just a bunch of stuff going on. 57 years old, just on a decline. And by the time she was 59, working together, doing the strength training, the food, the nutrition, getting into her gut, at 59 years old, she broke her first world record in the powerlifting raw division, in her division.
That's insane.
It was
Wow.
awesome. And she kept breaking records till 61, 62, and she retired. And I thought, like, there's something more to this. And so I dove more into it and got into the holistics and the body's ability to recover itself. And I started seeing people with PCOS. I started seeing women with hormonal issues or people with depression, anxiety, skin issues, asthma, you name it. And it always came back to the gut. Every time we addressed the gut, they got better. And so I went back to school. I became a holistic nutritionist, and then I specialized in gut. And the diseases I started to see got worse and worse, from IBS all the way to inflammatory bowel disease, which is Crohn's and colitis, which,
Yeah.
in my opinion, next to cancer, is one of the most severe gut digestive diseases any mammal can possibly get. And that's where I've specialized to today in the work that I've done, that we've been able to accomplish in people whose diseases were previously thought to be autoimmune and impossible, has actually gotten me where I am today. And I've had the pleasure with connecting with some of the world's most well-known, renowned, and famous physicians and health specialists. It's been quite a journey.
Wow, that is incredible. Well, how did you get connected to all these doctors and surgeons?
Well, I have to give credit where credit is due. So there was a client who found me on Facebook in one of my groups that I run for inflammatory bowel disease. And she found me, we did some work together. Over about 90 days, her symptoms went from what I'd say is about a 6 or 7 out of 10 to a 2, just completely turned around. And she was working with a functional medicine doctor named JP Salibi. And one of the things that I really respect is he reached out and he said, we want to talk, like, see what you guys were doing, see what you did differently. And he's become a friend and a mentor, and he's extremely well connected with some of the best through the FLCCC and the work that he does. And so he opened doors for me, started connecting me to some of these physicians, made email introductions. And one thing led to another after that. It was a matter of name dropping and saying, hey, I'm meeting with Peter McCullough, or I'm meeting with Paul Merrick, and I'm meeting with William Lee. And then I got Stephen Gundry onto the podcast, and like, it's just snowballed from there. And it's been an incredible journey. These last 6 months have been probably the fastest acceleration of my career. It's hard to keep up.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. Such fast moving progress. And your podcast is called Reversible, the
That's
ultimate
right.
gut health podcast. So we can find that on Apple and Spotify and places like that.
Anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Right. Reversible. Well, so how is this reversible? If some of my Mindful Tribe guests are suffering from stomach issues or pain, whatever, what do we have to do?
Well, you can find Reversible, the Ultimate Gut Health Podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts. So we do 2 episodes a week. One is a short where users or listeners can submit questions like, hey, how do I fix acid reflux naturally? How is my gut connected to my joint pain? What can I do? And so we answer those in a quick 10-minute episode. And then once a week, we have an interview with somebody who's way too famous to be on my podcast. So I said Stephen Gundry, Lisa Bilyeu, all kinds of phenomenal names who come in and speak about their role or how the gut affects our world and how the world affects our gut. We had Joel Salatin, if you've ever seen Food Inc., most famous farmer in the world. He was on talking about bioregenerative organic farming. We had Joe Winger talking about homesteading. We had Dr. Leo Gallen talking about the science of the microbiome, or William Lee about the causes of disease in the rest of the body that stem in the gut. And so it's just an exploration outside of what we're conventionally told. You're sick. Here's a symptom. Here's a drug. Instead, we're saying, what are the roots? How do we undo that and let the body heal itself? And it all starts in the gut.
I see. And I'm assuming that so many of us are consuming things that are causing inflammation. Is that correct?
Undoubtedly. And it's interesting, if we take a look at our food, Bruce, what you and I can access in a grocery store,
Yeah.
80% of that stuff, 90% never existed 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And so we have all these modern diseases. We have diabetes, we have Alzheimer's, we have fatty liver disease. We have all these things that are killing people. In fact, 93% of the leading causes of disease are directly connected to the gut. It's either responsible for or has a major role to play in what we're now calling natural deaths: stroke, Alzheimer's, cancers, cerebrovascular disease, which is, again, more brain disease, diabetes, kidney issues, liver issues, Parkinson's, influenza, all these things that our bodies are dying from naturally. We can actually trace back to the gut and say, here's the major role it played, either entirely on its own or had a major role to play and could have saved your life. We're calling them natural causes. And a large part of it is what we're consuming is not natural.
Oh, wait, just 93% I'm just digesting that number. Like,
Good
that's
pun.
just impossible to imagine. 93% of cases where people die, it's because of a problem with gut health. That's what you just said, isn't it?
So we'll say 93% of the leading causes of death. So if we take the CDC's 15 leading causes of death, 14 out of 15 is 93%. And those are all gut. And I'll tell you, this is a staggering number. So we talked about heart disease, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, all that. The 15th cause of death is suicide, homicide, accidents, injuries. So
Mhm.
self-harm or some kind of trauma, which means every leading cause of death right now, that is what we're calling, quote, natural causes of death, are something entirely preventable. They're chronic inflammatory conditions that wear and tear the body, which can be completely reversed in many cases or avoided altogether.
So can you share with us some of the ways that we can reverse this?
Absolutely. So the first things first, we have to understand our gut connection. We'll often say, well, I don't have gut issues. Well, what's normal? Right. And what we're doing in medicine, this is the hard part about Western medicine, is we are actively taking in all things, not just gut health, but even the blood labs that we draw from people. And we say, okay, well, here's a normal reference range. It's based on a population where the vast majority, we're talking up to 97%, are not metabolically healthy. And that's a quote directly from Dr. Joel Fairman, who said 97% of people are metabolically healthy. And that means their weight, their hormones, their metabolisms, how their body, the metabolism is just weight gain, weight loss. It's the entirety of your system. Everything, like a metabolism is really defined by any chemical function used to maintain life. So you and me sitting here, it's a metabolic function to talk and to think. And
Mhm.
so what we're looking at is 97% of people aren't metabolically healthy. And so we're measuring normal based on an unhealthy population. So the scale of normalcy slides downward as people get sicker and sicker. And we're seeing more diseases, more illness, more obesity, more diabetes, more Alzheimer's disease. We're seeing this happening. And so we're sliding our scale. And so we have to acknowledge first, if we want to improve this, that what's normal is light years away from optimal. And so we have to understand that as the defining factor. The second thing is we have to look at, even though I may not have gut symptoms like bloat, constipation, diarrhea, pain, cramping, acid reflux, you may have gut issues. If you have asthma, if you have any kind of like eczema, skin issues, something that might seem more benign, it could still be your gut. And so all these things can be connected. So any symptom, I want to first rule out what I call the low-hanging fruit. Is it
Mhm.
your gut? Is it from your food, your bacteria? Is there leaks in the gut? Leaky gut, it's not a bad thing, but it can be a bad thing. Too much
Mm.
of a good thing is a bad thing. And so that's the first. And second, we have to also acknowledge that, we can look at gut health and say, well, I'm going to go on a cleanse. We do a lot of this in our society, right? 30-day cleanse, a 7-day cleanse, a 2-day cleanse.
Mhm.
And we're always trying to keep up. That's all we're doing is keeping up. And so we have to understand, we have to treat our guts like a broken leg. If you broke your leg and it's up in a cast and it's shattered into pieces, you can't go jump on a trampoline 2 days later. It takes a long
No.
time to heal. So these 2-day, 7-day, 30-day cleanses, they're not enough. That
Mm.
tissue, even though you may be asymptomatic after a week or 4 weeks or whatever it is, it does take a long time, which is why we always have to go back to adopting this pro gut lifestyle rather than these pro gut weeks and go back to binge drinking and eating pizza on the weekends.
Mm. Interesting. And so much of our food that we consume is processed food, and so much of it has seed oils in it. And isn't it
Mm.
true that seed oils are causing a huge problem in our bodies?
I absolutely would say so. And there's interesting because we can look at some of the evidence in the actual data where they've done these double blind controlled trials. They say, well, we give it these people seed oils with this food and these people regular oils like olive oil and say they're perfectly fine. But the reality is, we can see the introduction of the seed oils back in the 50s, early 50s, and we can look at the disease growth charts and they're a vertical line, right? We're talking
Mm.
45 degrees straight uphill as we see a lot of these diseases incoming. And so the only thing we've really changed in our society, minus a slightly different lifestyle, is introducing seed oils, processed food, food coloring, food dye, high fructose corn syrup, and all kinds of stuff. And so, medicine will argue that correlation does not equal causation. That means just because it may be related doesn't mean it caused the problem.
Mhm.
But we have to step back and go, again, these foods have existed for 50 to 100 years at most. These diseases have existed for 50 to 100 years at most. So what's causing the problem? And start reducing and eliminating right away, and have some bloody reverence for nature, right? Our body is not designed to eat these things. Imagine any animal who eats what it's not supposed to eat gets sick, right?
Yeah.
If you feed dogs kibble as opposed to like raw meat, organs, and bones and stuff they're supposed to eat, you'll notice their fur gets really dry. Their stool gets really kind of soft and bulky and really smelly. You'll notice that their goops under their eye. A lot of dogs get the eye goop, and a lot of that's inflammation from the gut. And so you
Mhm.
switch them over to a raw diet, what they're supposed to eat. They don't have these excess byproducts causing waste, causing inflammation, causing eye goop. And the same thing happens with people.
Okay. And what do you eat and what do you avoid? That's what I'm interested in.
So personally, I advocate for an animal-based diet. There's a lot of mixed data on it, a lot of mixed reviews or mixed opinions, but I can tell you from personal experience, an animal-based diet, more meat, more fat, has done incredible for me. Now, that's circumstantial, right? So as a gut specialist, what I do is I look into people's digestive systems, one, symptomatically. So what's going on in the gut? What symptoms are we seeing? And we can figure out through a science called symptomatology. We just relate symptoms to disease processes. We can figure out what's going on. And so that's number one. But number two, I do stool samples. I read stool samples all day. And what we're looking at is your bacteria. Now, in your gut, we have between 1 and 2,000 species and 7 to 9,000 strains of those species, which gives us a variance of about 18 million different types of bacteria inside your gut. They make up about 100 trillion total. And for you and I, Bruce, you seem like a tall guy. You're probably what, 180, 200 pounds.
Yeah.
Your gut bacteria, 3 to 5 pounds. That's 2 to 3% of your entire body weight is just bacteria. And they outnumber your own body cells 10 to 1. And so they're extremely important. And we want to know what's going on in there. And so we can look at a GI map, which is a stool sample. We can read as much bacteria as we can see in 2023, and we can see what's in and out of balance. And based on those profiles, sometimes I do recommend people to have more berries and fruits and some vegetables and some meats. Other people, if they have a lot of overgrowth, they're reacting very poorly to starches and fibers and sugars, and they get really bloated, really smelly gas. That's a sign you have bacterial overgrowth. I'll go straight carnivore with them, nothing but meat and water, because we don't want to feed those bacteria things they can eat, because
Mm.
you eat and you poop, your bacteria eat and they poop. The question is, are they pooping good things or are they pooping bad things? And based on the balance of what we feed them and what they are in ratio, we get these byproducts, either helpful or harmful for our bodies and our brains.
Wow. So tell me about a client that might work with you. Do people work with you remotely? And if they do, how does this work? Is it a number of sessions and you just suggest what they should change in their lives?
Mm. Well, it's a great question because I do work remotely. I work all around the world. I'm in Canada. I've got clients in Vietnam, in the UK, New Zealand, Australia, mostly in the US as well. And what we want to do is we want to see, one, if they're severe enough. We only have so much space. So
Mhm.
primarily I work with inflammatory bowel disease, such as Crohn's and colitis, and
Right.
occasionally I'll take in the severe IBS if it's bad enough, because I actually look at them as a sliding scale. Medicine has spent 30 years trying to split the difference and say, well, these are different diseases. I'm now lecturing. That's one thing as well. Dr. Salibi, who brought me into this field with these medical doctors, he's got me now positioned at Priority Health Academy, where I get to lecture a few times a year and help teach doctors who want to learn functional medicine this stuff. And so my lecture content, what I'm doing is trying to blur these lines again and say irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease are the same thing. And so for your listeners who might go, well, I don't have either, this isn't for me. It's a spectrum. If you have acid reflux and a little bit of bloat, you are on a spectrum, a low grade spectrum toward developing irritable bowel syndrome. If you have irritable bowel syndrome that progressively gets worse and worse over the years, you're on a sliding scale toward developing inflammatory bowel disease, which is Crohn's and colitis. And so we see this spectrum of development. I look at it like, if you went for a hike, Bruce, I don't know if you like to walk, jog.
Definitely
Imagine
do.
you're a runner.
Yeah.
So imagine a brand new pair of shoes and you went out and you forgot to put socks on. What happens to your heel, right? It
Oh,
rubs and rubs and rubs until it
it
gets
does.
red. Then
Yeah.
it blisters, it gets raw. You keep going, you'll chew to the bone. And the
Hmm.
same thing happens with our gut. It's this little wear and tear. It's just a little bloat right now. It's a little constipation now or diarrhea now. It's a little bit of acid reflux, a little bit of change, a little bit of pain, a little bit of cramping. till it's a lot bit of all these things. And we've worn down those tissues and we developed these disease processes. And so who I work with primarily is Crohn's and colitis. But the idea is that we want all people to avoid this. Like I'm aftermath, man. I am damage control. I would much rather see people avoid coming to see me altogether,
Mhm.
because we can avoid a long process of a lot of difficult life. And, I recommend 90 days minimum.
Mhm.
For the most severe cases, we're talking 50 bowel movements a day with blood, which is very, very severe and a lot of pain. 90 days is a minimum to get them 50, 80% better. Some people, you'll continue working either on your own or with us. I recommend doing it on your own, change your lifestyle. But you can be years in the making till you get your gut back to normal, to being able to have a piece of cake without feeling like you want to die. And
Mhm.
so I recommend 1 to 2 months for every year you've had these severe diseases. If it's IBS, more like 1 month. It depends on how your body responds and reacts.
Wow. Wow. This is just fascinating. Well, I always ask a question about bullying on my show, and I'm not sure how this relates to anything that you've been talking about at all, but it's fascinating to hear how people can improve their lives just by changing their gut health and improving their gut health. And we can jump right to your podcast and learn so much right there on Reversible, the ultimate gut health podcast. If you were to write a book, tell me the general message that book would have to the audience.
This is a great question. I was literally, Bruce, thinking about this earlier this week, and I came up with a book title, and I would call it Antiquated Medicine. And to me, the Western world, we're missing so much. And like we talked about, the studies don't show, well, correlation and causation, and we can't say for certain it's this issue. To me, it's silly. Every medical student who's ever graduated from medical school knows the story of Ignaz Semmelweis. And he was a Hungarian physician who, back in 1956, decided we need to start washing our hands. That's the short of it. He observed 2 pediatric wards, one with doctors and one with midwives. And the one with doctors had a death rate 5 times higher. They called it childbed fever. These women, after giving birth, would just die. They didn't know why it was happening. And Dr. Semmelweis, and he decided to make this discovery that maybe we need to start washing our hands and washing our instruments. And he did. And the death rates dropped dramatically. It turns out these doctors weren't washing their hands between autopsies, between surgeries, between whatever they were dealing with. And they go and touch these women and these babies right in the middle of childbirth when their immune systems are the most vulnerable and they're open wounds. And so the doctors, you'd think this would-be hero will be celebrated. Oh, yay, like we discovered this new thing. We dropped death rates by 90%. But that wasn't the case. He was ostracized. They didn't want to be thought to be dirty. They didn't want to be blamed for giving these women childbed fever or blamed for their deaths. And so he lost his job. And I think that one day, this antiquated medical practice that we have today, where it's just symptom management, where we're not looking at the probability of these things and the correlation data strong enough, I think one day that's going to be out the window. And we're going to have a bit more reverence and respect for how nature intended all of us to be and all of us to eat.
Right. That makes sense. Do you meditate?
Yes and no. So I don't look at meditation. For me, meditation isn't ohms and chants and sitting in silence. I look at it as a reflection or a deep consideration. And so there are some people who will do this thing with an anxiety disorder where they replay back all the stuff they've done during the day, every conversation, every wrong word. That's not, to me, what it is. To me, it's going back over the things I've done, the things I've said, the thought processes I've had, and just looking for holes in the game and say, where am I wrong? What can improve? What are we missing? In this conversation now, even like my subconscious is going a million miles an hour, and I'm trying to connect the dots, but what are the things that maybe I missed? What could have been a better conversation? Could we have dove into the actual gut brain connection about the neurons and how your conscious moves at 100 miles an hour and your subconscious moves at 100,000 miles an hour? And, there's always more. And so what that does is it really allows me to improve what I do and what I deliver, what I bring to the table. And that, to me, is meditation. I live and breathe this stuff. To me, it's obsessive, but for others, maybe meditation is that relaxation moment because you just got 5 kids you shuttled in the car to soccer practice and you want to rip your hair and their hair out and you just
Yeah.
need some time to yourself, and that
Yeah.
can be meditation.
Yeah. Well, Josh, do you have a story about bullying that you can share with us where mindfulness would have made a difference?
You know what? I do, Bruce. So it's interesting. When I started this career, there's been a lot of changes. And like I said, Dr. Semmelweis was ostracized for bringing up new ideas. And we hate new things. We really do. As human species, we hate new things. We challenge them. We argue. We get fighty. And I was going all in. I decided, okay, I've got something here, and I'm just going to tell the world that I am reversing these horrible diseases. And I put a post on my Facebook page, and I said, 9 out of 10 cases of ulcerative colitis can be reversed. And again, it's Western medicine says it's autoimmune. There's nothing we can do. Take these drugs, and hopefully we don't have to cut out your colon one day. And that's the approach. And we're fully reversing these conditions so successfully. I've been given a job or a faculty position as a medical lecturer to talk about how we're doing it. And that's a success we're having. And I said, I'm going to tell the world. Well, Reddit did not like that. Oh yeah, they took my information. I was getting harassed. I got threatened. They took my booking and booked me out at nope@fu.com. Just like, you're an idiot. You can't say this. You can't do that. You don't know what you're talking about. People just went off the rails because they got so defensive about me coming in saying, hey, you don't have to live like this anymore. And so that was really tough. And I almost quit. I was like, you know what? Be miserable, live in pain. I put this post on my Facebook page, and it was actually the community of people I had helped so far who came back like, man, I was 16 years of dealing with this, like horrible pain, every doctor, every drug, 50 bowel movements a day. She's like, she described it as a faucet. Sorry guys, that's gross, but that's her reality she lived in. And she says 3 weeks I was symptom free. I've had people coming out of the woodwork to support me after, being harassed and bullied for a new idea. And I thought, screw them, I'm going to keep going. And it took some work. My wife can tell you it was a rough week. It really was, but we are here now, and we are really making waves, and we're changing medicine as we know it. And I'm very excited about that.
So how do you deal with it now when you get these haters?
I laugh. It's you, if you can't laugh, you'll cry. You know what I mean? Like, I do love what I do so much. And I've got people of all ages. I'm working with a 5-year-old right now, and his parents came to see me. He had ulcerative colitis, so same 15 plus bowel movements a day. This poor kid in pain, losing weight, pale gray. And he's 5. So it's right in development when, the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobes of the brain are developing. Like, if we don't fix this kid now, he will have developmental delays. He will have learning disabilities.
For sure.
And he may actually develop autism. That can happen.
Yeah.
And so his parents came to see me. His doctor was just giving him drugs. We found his root cause. He was fully infested with mold, which caused changes to his gut bacteria, which caused this inflammation. And we started working on him. And within a week, 2 weeks, we got him out of the environment, started cleaning his system, and his symptoms were cut in half immediately within 2 weeks. And so that is just a wonderful thing that I get to do. And I forget what was the question on that one, Bruce? I lost my train of thought there.
Well, I was just asking you how you deal with haters now.
Oh, that's how. So I get to lean into the wonderful, wonderful benefits of people reversing their disease. And I rely on these people because it's the most fulfilling thing I can do in my life. It really is. And the haters, I feel bad. I used to laugh, and I can laugh now. They just roll off my shoulders because we're changing lives as kids as young as 2, 3, 4 years old.
Wow.
Who could have a lifetime of horrible pain and disease ahead of them, versus these kids now. He's 5 years old. Kid would waddle around the house because his joints and his feet hurt so much. And he gets to go out and play in the sun, and he gets to just be a little boy. And that, to me, is just amazing.
That is amazing.
We're giving people their lives back.
Well, you're definitely on the right track. I interviewed a very successful person who had haters, and he took this stance that I thought was quite interesting. Whenever he got someone like this that said terrible things or whatever, he would even print it out, and sometimes he would even record what the person said, and he would play it over and over, and he would like celebrate because he's like, hey, I'm making a difference. The fact that people are so angry about this, or people are so negative, that means that I'm getting my message out to all the people that are being helped. And somehow he reversed it so that was a plus in his life instead of a negative. And I thought that was really fascinating. And you're kind of doing the same sort of thing from what you described.
It's firepower. And again, it's seek first to understand. If I can look at these people and say, well, they've been indoctrinated, really, their doctors have told them there's
Yes.
nothing you can do. Take these drugs. They've leaned into this life of being miserable. And it's really interesting. Have you ever watched the TV show House?
No, I haven't.
Mm. It's an older show. One of my favorites. Hugh Laurie plays Dr. House, and it's this investigative medicine. And the word mustard seed. He goes, "Oh, interesting," and thinks about this case and fixes somebody. But they're medical mysteries, and I love it.
Yeah.
And there was one episode where this boy was deaf, and while they were doing some procedures, they put a cochlear implant in his head. And he woke up and he could suddenly hear, and he lost it. He ripped this thing out of his head because he didn't want his deaf friends to no longer like him or want to be around him. And that's something we see often. There are people who will identify with this disease process. And with all the love in the world, I pity this process, because not that they're pathetic pity, but just I want so badly for them to understand they can have a better quality of life. And if these people in your circle, because now you're a colitis warrior, and now you have this community, and these people in your circle, if they want you to be sick with them, they're not your friends, man. Right. And I see a fair bit of that. People are afraid to lose their identity, afraid to lose their community. People are afraid to get better because, well, I'm the girl who has this problem. I'm the guy who goes to see this physiotherapist, and it's our identities.
Right.
And when that gets rattled or shaken, we can lose a lot of that. And to understand there's a whole greener side on the other side of that fence. The grass is beautiful. The flowers are blooming, and there's fruit on the trees, and you can live a life worth having rather than being in pain and stuck on medication. And so I need to understand where these people are coming from. They're stuck. They're lost. They don't understand. They're angry. And what does it mean? If you can get fixed in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, it means you live 5 years, 10 years like this, and you shouldn't have. You got somebody to blame. You're going to be angry. And so it can be difficult sometimes for me to understand that, especially being on the inside, knowing how healthy people can be. But it's a really important part of practice as a clinician to really understand what these people are going through, both physically and psychologically, emotionally.
Well, I can feel your passion. You're definitely in the right place doing this work that you do, and you're so passionate about it. It's incredible. You mentioned about mold. Do you run into situations with parasites sometimes?
Often. Yeah, I do see them quite frequently. In fact, there's 2021, this girl I'm working with now, same thing, diagnosis of ulcerative colitis. We did a stool sample, and her doctors just gave her drugs, said, here's the things, take this, take that, and you'll be on these for life. And they were happy to just give her drugs for life. We took one stool sample, found a parasite called Endolamax nana. 3 weeks, symptoms are gone, like 80-90% gone. She's got a little bit of residual because the tissue is, again, worn out like a heel in a shoe. So we have to repair that, but it can be that simple. Parasites, I'd see 1 in 40. I see Lyme disease, probably 1 in 40, mold, 1 in 20, 1 in 30. Most commonly, it's stress, lifestyle, antibiotic use, foods, all kinds of stuff that we're doing, medications that we're using that are destroying our gut bacteria. And if we go right back to birth, Bruce, if we look at children, right, the Environmental Working Group actually did a study. They'd taken through Red Cross, I believe it was. They took 10 freshly cut umbilical cords. They tested them for bacteria, for chemicals. And I forget the exact stats. It was 267 unique chemicals found inside of these babies, who were unborn babies or freshly born babies. And we're talking things like petroleum. We're talking certain chemicals and products that should never be inside an infant's body. And these things are very, very dangerous. And so we have to understand that we are even starting off on a negative note, right? So they cut these 10 cords. They had pollutants and pesticides. They had waste products from burning coal, garbage, chemicals used in stains and oil repellents. 180 of these chemicals were known to cause cancer in humans or animals. 217 are toxic to the brain and nervous system, and 208 cause birth defects or abnormal developments in animal tests. And we found this in babies. So from birth, we have an uphill battle to walk. We have this toxic burden. And so there's a lot of causes, but parasites, mold, Lyme disease, heavy metals, toxins, all kinds of stuff are leading causes for sure.
Wow, that's fascinating. Your website is reversiblepod.com, and that takes us to your podcast, and I think you have other things on there too. But as we move forward in the interview, I want to ask you 5 quick answer questions. So just 30-second answers are perfect, Josh. The first one is this: who is one person that has been a powerful mindfulness influence in your life?
Ooh, Wow, I wish you prepped me for these ones, Bruce. That's a tough call. A mindfulness influence. I have a mentor of mine.
Uh-huh.
So my wife and I are both Christians, and that's something I've always battled with a lot is like my personal spiritual growth. And I have a mentor of mine, Kyle, who's been extremely pivotal in just my awareness and my approach to things and my relationship with God and what I do in my personal life. And that's been a really important thing for me is having a mentor who's already where I desire to be. He can walk me through where I am and how to get there. It's better than walking through a forest blind.
Yeah, for sure. My second question is about emotions. How has mindfulness helped you deal with your emotions in a better way?
Dramatically. So I have ADHD. It's something I've dealt with a long time and actually fixing my gut 99%. You'd never know I have it unless you live with me. And so when I was going through a lot of this process trying to fix it, I was trying Vyvanse and other drugs. I was having mood swings, outbursts, suicidal thoughts. Like I was a mess emotionally, psychologically. And after coming through that and healing up my gut, I was able to then look back and see what was going on and how miserable my wife was during this process. And, God love her just sticking with me. And like we went to counseling and did all this stuff. And a lot of it came back to how my body was creating chemicals in my brain. And so the mindfulness of my physical body allowed me a reflective mindfulness of my psychological body and what was going on there.
Wow, that's interesting. Let's talk about breathing. And maybe you have some comments or thoughts about breathing and maybe through mindfulness.
Mhm. So breathing's interesting because we live in a world where we are deoxygenated. Gary Brecka is a fellow who's getting very famous right now through 10x Health. And he's famous for this quote. He says, the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. And we do live in deoxygenated states. If I take your blood right now, Bruce, and I look at it under a microscope, your blood cells are probably aggregated, not coagulated, but aggregated electronically. They'd be drawn together like static cling. And so if we go out and just simply go 10 minutes in the earth, touch barefoot to the dirt in the earth, you discharge all these ions, those blood cells open up, which means you have more surface area, which means you have more room for oxygenation. And by getting into the sunlight, getting infrared on your skin, getting and touching the earth, we hyperoxygenate our bodies. You can add up to 16 times more oxygen to your mitochondrial cells, which imagine having 16 times more oxygen and with it energy. And so breathwork's a very important part, following guys like Wim Hof. What I'll
Mhm.
do before an interview like this, I'll sit down for 5 to 8 minutes. I'll do 30 breaths, really dramatic in and out. And on the last breath, I exhale, comfortable exhale, and I just hold it as long as I can. It's a minute, 2 minutes. You keep going, you go 3 minutes, 4 minutes, you'll be able to hold your breath, and we hyperoxygenate the tissue. And that gives me better digestion, better breath, better energy, better mental clarity. All these things, my body starts to work better with that oxygen. So it's a big part of it.
Oh, that's fascinating. And yeah, I want to ask you about if there's a book that you would recommend related to this.
Related to oxygen.
Yeah, related to
Yeah.
any of this topic that we've been discussing,
Oh,
really.
sure. Well, the first one I would look at is called The Oxygen Advantage. That one's by Patrick McCone, and he talks about the use of oxygen in sports and cognition and all kinds of stuff. It's fantastic. And for those who are listening, we'll talk, I guess, more my spectrum, which would be autoimmune disease. There is a fantastic book by Dr. Amy Myers called The Autoimmune Solution. And she's a very renowned functional medicine doctor who talks about all these people coming with autoimmune conditions and diseases. The doctors go, well, it's genetic, which that it just doesn't make sense. Genetics don't just do that to you. She talks about all these conventional ways that medicine approaches these diseases and how people turn their lives around dramatically. And so the whole idea is to let you guys know that there is hope. No matter the situation you're in, if given the right conditions, your body will heal itself. As a total left field one for you here, Bruce, there was a woman in the United States and she was having issues. She developed MS. So for those of you who know, it's MS, your body just basically stops working.
Right.
And what had happened with her, she was drinking 4 liters of Diet Coke a day. Well, that's full of aspartame, which is a known neurotoxin. She dropped the Diet Coke, and within a couple of weeks, her symptoms started to go away. Within a few months, perfectly fine. She did not have MS. She had a symptom. And so again, if given the right conditions, your body will heal itself. But things in our food, diet, lifestyle, emotions, a lot of these things can create blockages in the normal signaling process of our body as it tries to communicate back and forth with itself and with each other. And so if we can just get out of its way, Our body is beautifully and wonderfully made. It is immaculate in design. And if given the conditions, it will sustain and heal itself. We have to try to stop outsmarting it with 7-day detoxes. It doesn't work.
Yeah. My last question is about an app. Are there any apps at all that you use or that you recommend?
For me personally, Audible and Spotify. My wife loves fiction. I love nonfiction. I could fill my brain with incredible stuff all day. The stuff that gets me the jollies. I'm listening to Dr. Amy Meyer's book again right now, just to go through and refresh a lot of this stuff. And so for me, it's education. I also do a lot of poetry. I do just amateur songwriting, and I make a lot of music and write poetry that way. And so going through these songs and listening to this music, and not like, modern day hip hop. It's just, to me, it's garbage. I could, make that stuff in my sleep. But it's the underground, the guys who put a lot of thought. Like, one of my favorite artists is Deca, goes by DECA, by Deca. And he's got some phenomenal, really like the lyrics are just so deep and so metaphorical, and they tell stories. And to me, that's what I use to unlock a lot of creative potential in my life and myself, is listening to other people who express themselves in a way that my brain understands, which is visualization and poetry, and again, nonfiction books.
Wow, I see. And so you do music. Do you make it available to others, or is it strictly for your own use?
One day I will. I posted one song on Spotify that I'm probably going to take it down. I don't love it, but it's out there. It was my first one I ever made. And so now,
Yeah.
having done this for a couple more years, I can see how rough it is. But I just spend so much time with my clients. It is my greatest passion above all else, that I don't make enough time for the creative stuff like music. But one day it will be publicly available. I love doing it. I love writing, and it's allowed me personally to process a lot of my life and a lot of the challenges because we all deal with stuff, whatever it is. And it's how I process. Some people journal, some people write, some people make music, some people scream into a pillow. It's just whatever does it for you.
And how can potential clients get in touch with you, Josh?
Well, the best way to reach me, there is a contact form through my website, reversiblepod.com. That's reversible, ABLE pod.com. There's a contact form. There's a button there that says work with me. And the best way, if you guys just want to scratch the surface, is like you said, Bruce, I appreciate the plug on that, is just listening to the podcast. We have some of the world's best, like I had mentioned earlier, who've come on the show just to talk about all the things in life that influence our gut, and how our gut influences our life and our world, and the interaction between them, and the importance. And my goal with this show is just to help us develop a reverence to understand that our gut bacteria really are more important than our very own DNA. And if we can understand the basics, even the most fundamental stuff around supporting that, our lives will be much healthier, happier, longer, more cognitive, more aware, more mindful, more rested, more everything. And we can have better lives and be better people because of it.
Wow. As we prepare to wrap up the interview, do you have any final words of advice that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I may have just given them.
Yeah, I was thinking that. Like, you really did sum it up. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a mindfulness and awareness. Our guts integrate with everything. If you have insomnia, if you sleep with a CPAP because you have sleep apnea, if you have asthma, if you have anxiety, you have depression, if you're dealing with any condition, any disease, you deal with acne, skin issues, joint pain, whatever it is, it can be coming from your gut. And so to simply understand the basics of having a healthy gut, what goes on in your gut bacteria, that's the best advice I can give, is look for the roots, look for the root cause. Because these conditions we deal with, these diagnoses, like a diagnosis, people will have arthritis, I have this condition. A diagnosis is simply a word that describes the current state of affairs. Right? If you go to the doctor, they give you a diagnosis, they assess your symptoms, they give you a word, that's your diagnosis. And with that diagnosis comes a drug. That's how Western medicine deals with that. They're great at emergencies and surgery, terrible at everything else. And so what we want to do is understand that there's a root to these things. A diagnosis isn't permanent. It's a current state of affairs, a word that describes your condition. So let's go back. Why did this thing happen? What is the root? What is the imbalance that caused these signals to get crossed? I mean, if I went to the hospital with a thorn in my hand that's bloody, swollen, and infected, and they gave me ointment for the pain, I'd be pretty pissed. I'd be asking questions like, why aren't you pulling out the thorn? That goes for every disease, every condition, we'll say any situation in the body that's not optimal. Oh, my skin's too dry, my hair's too brittle. It's coming from somewhere. We just have to find it. And if we can do that, you can change a lot of stuff. And that's why I put these free programs on my website at reversiblepod.com/free. There's lots of stuff there just to help with basic digestive issues.
Well, Josh, I can tell why the Priority Health Academy has recruited you, because you're such a great communicator and you're so passionate about the topic. I totally believe in what you do. Thank you so much for sharing it and getting out there and getting up so early to get on this podcast. I really appreciate it, Josh.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, Bruce. I really appreciate you having me. And if there's anything I can do for you and your audience, please don't hesitate to reach out. Let me know if you guys want to come back anytime and just dive into the science and the depth and how it connects and all the biology behind it in a very obviously simplistic and easy to understand way. I'm always happy to do that as well.
Okay. Thanks so much, Josh. Bye now.
Thanks, Bruce.